What's up? You want my water?
Go, Danny.
He's busy.
You're on.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the PEL Aftershow. I am hosting this party, and that's what I hope it will be. It's kind of like a little party where everybody gets to talk and discuss what they thought about the episode. And we have Mark joining us. Thank you. Let's give a round of applause. I'm going to host it like an MC.
Really?
We have Mark over here. The episode is episode 115, and it is Schopenhauer on music and art with guest Jonathan Siegel. So, first of all, I'm going to tell you that this episode spoke to me a lot as an artist. When we talk about art being subjective and about art, what the purpose of the artist is and the purpose of the art is, it's a question that's often on my mind. And I wonder, for people who are not artists, how this episode affected them. Let's start by going to Mark, because Mark is on the show. Mark, what struck you the most about this episode?
Well, I feel like I've already gotten to talk enough. So
Okay.
I mean, I was inspired enough by, it was good talking to Jonathan. I see he just joined and then left, and so maybe he'll be joining us any minute. Our guest from the actual episode said that he would be here if he can figure out the technical aspect. And that was successful enough, and it took us long enough to actually get talking about music that he and I have scheduled a follow-up with another of the guys in Camper Van Beethoven, with Victor, the bass player. So we're going to be doing a whole discussion just on music and not talking about Schopenhauer at all. So that was what most excited about me, is finally getting a chance to get loose with another musician on music and not just have retreat to some more generally artistic talk, as it usually happens when we do these things.
Right.
Well, then we have a lot. Go ahead.
We have a lot of people in the group, and I want to make sure. I mean, this is very different than the last time I hosted, where it was only one of us. So I'm pretty excited to hear everybody's thoughts. Let's do some introductions. I'm going to start here with David. How are you, David?
I am well. Thank you for hosting the Aftershow.
Thank you for joining the Aftershow. It's a pleasure to have you. I'm pretty excited about it. There's a lot to talk about this episode, and I feel like it's all, like I mentioned, pretty personal. Art appreciation. Now, David, are you an artist?
No, I'm more of an engineer.
But you've got the beard of an artist. You've got the beard.
I like to think that there's some artistry in engineering, but I do play trombone and guitar.
I just had somebody sign on that needs to put on headphones because we're getting a lot of echo. So either just mute yourself for the moment. Oh, that was Anthony. He's just simply dropped off.
Okay. So do we have David still?
Yeah, I'm still here. Yeah.
Okay, so where are you broadcasting from?
I'm in College Park, Maryland.
Should be up on this technology.
Ah, cool.
So
and how long have you been a PEL listener?
Only about a week. I saw Partially Examined Life on a list of podcasts from some other podcaster who said you should be listening to these, and this is one I actually should be listening to. So.
And you listened. That's fantastic.
Yeah, far too much lately. I need to pace myself.
Hey, I see Jonathan, our guest from the last one, jumped on. Say hey.
Hey, Jonathan.
We can't hear you. Your mic is not appropriately written. So perhaps we're just lying to the audience. But who else we got? We got Dave Buchanan. Do I see that?
How you doing?
From our Persig episode. We have someone named Kevin. Kevin, where are you calling from?
I'm calling from Seattle.
What's your deal? Are you an artist of some sort?
Yeah. Well, I'm studying. I'm at the university right now. But
you have drums behind you, so.
Yeah. I'd say I'm an amateur in several several different areas. I'm studying cinema, though.
Awesome, good for you. What kind of cinema do you like?
I definitely come from a background. You guys have been really influential to me. So I've listened to just about every podcast now since high school.
Wow.
And
Which was last week. You look very young.
I do. I'm actually 22. It's
Okay.
been a while, which
Yeah.
could still be young. But
Just last week for
I'm
me.
drawn to a lot of movies that present thinking problems. Ex Machina, the one that came out just recently, I thought that was really well done. My 2 cents.
I really want to see that.
I
Yeah.
haven't seen it either. Cool. So let's jump into it. Do you have any thoughts on this week's episode?
Start with a new person to ask them their thoughts. I see Sebastian. You look like you're muted, so if you unmute yourself, we can hear you.
Hi there.
How are you, Sebastian?
Hi. How are you guys doing? Nice to see you guys.
What is your thought about this? Do you have a thought about this week's episode to kick us off?
Well, I would not like to be the person. There's a reason why I muted my microphone.
Oh, all right. What about Kevin? I see we have Kevin join us.
Well, I just came home from a bicycle ride. I got this email on my phone, join, Parks Lake Examine Live discussion, and I thought, well, why not? But I have not listened to the episode at all. I was just excited about joining the conversation if I could.
Well, you're welcome as well. We
right, thank
appreciate having you here, and hopefully you'll get something out of this conversation and go back and listen to the episode.
Right.
You can work retroactively as well. I think now I don't know, Mark, if you'll agree with me, but I hope I'm onto the right track where I say that this thing is kind of a show in its own, the after show. Is that
Hopefully that was the plan. When it was last
Right.
week when we had one person, that was not so well. But I see we've actually, I think, maxed out the participants here, and we have two that we have not yet named.
Sorry.
we won the internet, folks? We did it.
I see we have a Todd. Todd, we cannot see your face, but can you say something so we know that you're live?
Yes. Good afternoon. This is Todd from San Diego, California.
I have to go for a second.
Are you a musician of some sort, or what was your attraction to this episode in particular?
I was a philosophy major at UCSD, and reading The World as Will and Representation was one of the classes I took there. I've just really loved that book and the way it seems to tie in metaphysics to an aesthetics to also at the end an ethics. It just seems to be one really complex and worked out system that Schopenhauer came up with.
Yeah, it's interesting from last week's episode to this week's episode that we're still dealing in the same book, but it covers such a wide variety of thought, I felt.
And then I see we have one more besides Jonathan, who is now sitting with his daughter. I see Anthony, who looks like he's actually riding a bike or something. You're walking around the house while broadcasting your face?
I'm going to the store to buy kindling.
People can participate. That's a model action for a thing to do while on the after show with us.
Right.
Although if this is a party, where are all the chicks? We have a solid block of men.
The only girl here is 4 years old.
Jonathan, what is your daughter's name?
Okay.
This is Marlo.
Hi, Marlo.
Hey, Marlo.
And you guys are
I got a
uploading
bunch of
sleepy
models
men.
joining us.
Yeah, Marlo should be in bed actually, but she's not going to sleep.
She's very cute.
All right, so who wants
I
to
want
start?
to say that I didn't listen to the show. I want to say that I didn't listen to the show,
Anthony.
but that if I may, I want to say that I didn't listen to the show, but I love Schopenhauer on style. That's basically what I want to say.
Yeah.
You want to expand on that? What do you love about him?
I think for me, he was the first philosopher who emphasized that the way in which you convey your ideas is as important as the ideas themselves. and not that style trumps substance, but that that the care in which you take to convey your ideas is as important as the ideas themselves.
And that is a lot of what you guys talked about in this episode when it came to art, was basically the focus on the artwork or on the message of the artwork. So,
And his
I mean,
his ideas that that regardless of how the artwork was put together, I'm sorry, I'm divided here between daughter and Schopenhauer. The message the message essentially was in a process of communication between the artwork and the viewer, or the artwork and the audience.
yes. And I feel that way as well, specifically as an artist. The divide is like, what's the point of it, you know?
Right.
So, you know, are you just doing art to do art? Is the message important? Is it irrelevant? These are the big questions of art. And I think he tackled them quite well. But they still left me with a lot of questions. I don't know. I'd recently discussed John Cage with somebody who talks a lot about music theory.
Did you talk about John Cage in terms of music or aesthetics?
Yeah, a bit. You know, he and forgive me because I have a lousy memory for specifics, but I know that he did a piece, and I won't remember the name of it. You probably will know it, where he didn't play music for.
Yep, it's a 3-movement piece called 4 minutes and 33 seconds.
Right. So I mean, I was thinking about that a lot while listening to this show this week, because it's you know, there is the lack of art with a message, therefore becoming art.
Exactly, or his ideas. I mean, this is straying from Schopenhauer, but his ideas were very Zen influenced in a way that Schopenhauer was also very Zen influenced, or I should say Vedically influenced. He was reading a lot of Indian philosophy, but the idea being that what you're listening to is everything around you, so that the aesthetic that you come up with is
the ambient noise
is the ambient noise, is the understanding of everything that's around you is music. The aesthetic experience that you're after is everything that's around you.
But to tie it back into the conversation about Schopenhauer, you know, maybe that's the message of it. You know, maybe the message in itself is the art. I want to switch it up and let other people talk a little bit. Is there anybody who wants to jump in and say anything?
I'm gonna go. I have to go put somebody to bed.
Very cute kid there. So understandable. Thanks for joining us. Bye.
I'm sure he'll be back, but like most parties, most after-show parties, people bring their small children and then have to leave in the middle to put them to bed.
Right. Yeah.
That's what happens.
All the parties I go to, the children, you know, the best parties in LA. So let's go to somebody else. I'd like to. I'm new to this, so I want to try and make sure that everybody's voice gets heard. And I'd like to hear from anyone. So does anyone want to weigh in, either on the episode, or on art, or on music, or on music theory, or on anything that we've talked about?
I'll chime in.
Okay, great.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
I listened to the episode and I heard, I think it was Jonathan made a reference to Pythagoras. And I was like, and I thought, well, that's why this sounds kind of familiar. And then I remembered that Joseph Campbell, the mythologist, comparative mythologist, he's quoting Schopenhauer all the time in the context of myth, especially the myth of Orpheus and Eurydice. You know, Orpheus plays the lyre. He's the greatest musician that ever lived. It's a Greek mythological figure. So I looked into that. You know, so I'm thinking about how mythic Schopenhauer's vision is. This idea that, you know, the will is the one, and the world of the plurality or the many, all these individuals are kind of illusory in the sense that really underneath they're just one. And that's like the central myth. I mean, it's not just in Buddhism and in the Vedas, the Upanishads, but you know, in Orpheus and Eurydice you see this. And this all was triggered by somebody mentioning Pythagoras on the episode, because the Pythagoreans thought Orpheus was the dude. He was the main man. And it's sort of the idea being here that geometry and music go together, and the playing of the lyre is sort of supposed to harmonize your soul with the universe, with that one thing. So I don't even know what specifically to say about that. I just hoped that, you know, I could bring that to the table today, and at some point I could, you know, interject that and it would make some sense. So the mythology of this, you know, this musical god. Right, the episode was all about Wagner's saying that music is exceptional, unlike the other arts, because it isn't representational. Somehow it's a direct mainlining of the will. You know.
Mark, do you want to?
I don't know if that's going to go anywhere, but that's what I brought to the table today.
Yeah, well, this brings back yet another comparison. I know Schopenhauer's a militant atheist, but in so many of the ways that he would incorporate the mystical into his thinking, that it just sounds so much like a form of theism without an actual god.
That's what I was thinking. I kept thinking, this guy's not an atheist the way he's set up.
So if you're a Pythagorean, then it's or that notion. Actually, I'm not so familiar with Pythagoras writing about this in particular. I mean, I know that there's a mystical significance attached to ratios in any form, and so that's supposed to come out through the tones of the chord being so. You know, that's why they resonate with us, is because they resonate with the universe in some way. And so yeah, and seeing, you know, I had said even with Plato. You know, Plato sidelined the art, sidelined music as mere imitation, but what he should have been doing is what Schopenhauer did, is saying something like, it is the universe or God speaking directly to you. It is the form of the good, you know, so making all those comparisons, and so you know, you get something similar here, even though we don't have a God as a whole. It's the will itself speaking up, you know, even if you interpret it, you know, per the Vedas as that God is an inner part of you, is some part of you that normally is invisible to empirical experience. Still, that's what's going on. It's the divine showing through into the world.
God being part of you as an empirical experience. Can you explain that to me?
Well, I mean, that it's not. In other words, your everyday. This is again just me imposing more Eastern philosophy, but I think justifiably onto Schopenhauer, that our everyday experience of the self is the empirical ego. You know what that is. You know that you have desires, you have interests, you have a limited amount of stuff that you consider to be you, and that you can see before you. You know, the regular experience of the self. But then that's supposed to be an illusion, and somehow if we can tear that away, then we can see that we are one with the universe.
Sounds very Eastern. Yeah.
Yes. So Schopenhauer's version of that is not that we are one with a universal God or oneness Brahma that's sitting under there that we should then identify with and have love for everything, but that it's the striving will. But I guess that's also a problem we're running into, that on the one hand, if you think I'm identifying with the striving will, that doesn't sound like a peaceful thing. The way he actually describes it, it is more like I'm one with God and we're all chilling, because I've thrown away all the things that are nasty about will, are our individual desires, our individual things that are bugging us. So if we actually can get rid of that attachment to the personal ego and attach ourselves to this larger will, then, well, okay, he still wants to characterize it as striving, but the experience we have is of peace, is of something that is away from our everyday cares.
Mark, what I don't understand is, how can you have will without ego?
Anybody who's really into Schopenhauer want to weigh in on that?
I'd point to a quote that Campbell uses from Schopenhauer, where Schopenhauer is saying, isn't it remarkable the way, normally the self, small s self, is always interested in self-preservation and self-interest and things like that. But sometimes there's a situation where even a stranger, somebody you don't know, is about to be killed in some terrible accident or whatever, and you put yourself at risk in order to save this other person, which sort of defies, the ego consciousness. And Schopenhauer's claim is that what you see in a situation like that is the will, the metaphysical reality that we're all one thing underneath it, that sort of breaks through, this metaphysical truth breaks through into that moment, and you act like that person was you. There's no distinction between your life and the life of that other person, and so it's important to, even if you might die in the attempt, you've got to try to save them. And he says, this is spontaneous instinct. People do this without even thinking. And he took that as sort of evidence of the underlying will.
Would you say that Schopenhauer's mysticism is more in line with, say, Spinoza, where God is more intrinsic to the universe rather than some kind of external being that's created the universe?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's why he can claim to be an atheist, and why Spinoza was accused a lot of being an atheist, because if you say that the universe itself is equivalent to God in some sense, well, since most people in traditional religion would consider God to not be that, then it's almost a matter of just which word you pick. Are you an atheist, or are you a God is immanent in everything? It sort of, I guess, depends on what the practical upshot. And for Schopenhauer, the practical upshot is not that God is all around us. There's sweetness and light. So he doesn't doesn't call himself a pantheist, whereas Spinoza might. Although for Spinoza, he doesn't have that touchy-feely take on it either. So.
I think for me, the will and God or gods, these concepts are pretty far removed from my experience of music. I find the topic interesting, but I think it was Wes in the episode pointed out that you are at concerts you see people playing air guitar, but you don't see people at museums air painting. So there's something about music that wants to be you, if I can say it that way. Does that? I bring that up because it's something that resonates with my experience, where these other concepts don't. Do they seem similar to any of you interested in the other idea? I'm not sure if that's a clear question. Sorry.
Let's try and rephrase it. You're saying that music is trying to be the person?
Well, I don't know. That's just. I think Wes has expressed it best. There's something personal and participatory about listening to music in a way that the other arts don't have. I can enjoy visual art, but I'm.
It's an interactive art.
It's very passive, and I feel like music is something that's actually happening in my head. Anyway, Wes already made that observation, but I wondered if any of you connected that idea to some of the other thoughts that have been expressed recently.
What do you think, Kevin?
Well, I guess I come to this not having heard the episode, but my thought is that whenever I come to the table that is with another person that I'm listening to, or whether it be a piece of art, whether that be a visual piece of art or theater or music, I have to listen to that, whether it's, I listen to it whether it's visual or not, and I have some kind of, for me it's kind of a Zen thing, where you're more or less a blank sheet, listening to this phenomenon or whatever before you, and it does something to you. Now, in the notes it says, that there's no titillation or anything like that, but certainly there's got to be some kind of experience, of what the art is, and it does kind of, for me, let's say if I'm watching a Shakespeare play or something like that, I tend to get engaged intellectually. I don't know if that's as well, but so I don't know if that's titillation. I don't know if that's what Schopenhauer is talking about when this willlessness or something. I haven't heard the episode, so I don't understand that. I'd like to know a little bit more about that.
Well, one thing Schopenhauer says about being in this will-less state is that it's a state that's free from the principle of sufficient ground, which seems to be partly outside of time as well. And one problem that I always had with Schopenhauer, and especially listening to the episode, was why he leaned so heavily on music being the best medium to bring you out of the principle of sufficient ground. Because music seems to be really reliant on time and that kind of measuring.
Question mark.
I think that one of the things that he
I don't even understand how you're using the term corruption, question mark. You seem to have a particular definition, comma. Corruption is what interferes with systems, period. Okay, comma. I guess, comma.
George, are you trying to text and reading the punctuation out? You're actually talking to people.
On top of that, that he feels that certain character disorders cause that corruption. Period.
Is George calling in from another planet, or is he responding?
Yes, I don't know, comma.
Thanks, George. We have some new people joining the chat as well. And I see that Jonathan is back from putting the kid down. That was quick. Good job.
It had actually been going on for an hour.
Oh, really? Okay. She's down. It didn't take any whiskey or anything, right? That's.
I'm not saying.
I'm sorry, I missed a bit while I was typing to people, but just to make the connection between the imitation that David had brought up with the God stuff. I mean, I guess if you think that we are all underlyingly one, we are all underlyingly the will, then you would think that anything that is an expression of the will would inspire would sort of make us realize that oneness, and straight up wanting to imitate what is being done would be a natural seeming response to that. But I actually don't agree with this whole music or any other art as an expression of our underlying oneness or as anything coming through that's divine. So this is just me speculating logically based on the concepts involved, not actually giving an opinion of my own.
What is your opinion?
I think there's you could give an entire physiological account, and many people write entire books of why certain gestures work really well for us in music. Like we talked a little bit on the episode about to what extent does the fact that a major chord or the resolution toward in a cadence, to what extent is that universal, is that biologically grounded, or the beat within a song? It seems like a lot of these things, either they might be biologically grounded actually, in which case they would be universal, or just given neuroplasticity. Somebody raised in the comment section in the blog about this, that we could have sort of, in other words, even if it wasn't biologically based in the first place, and so everybody's going to react to major chords this way, the fact that we have adapted through listening to this kind of stuff throughout our lives, it means we're sort of, our brains become more and more attuned to enjoying this kind of stuff. So I think you could give, that doesn't get at the phenomenology of it at all, and there's a lot of interesting things to say about our experience of music, but if you're talking about just why do people enjoy certain kind of music, or why does it make you want to get up and dance or play air guitar, I think we could probably give regular old scientific descriptions of it that don't refer to anything like Schopenhauer's referring to. It doesn't have to have a metaphysical grounding at all, I guess.
Yeah, I'm thinking that the sympathetic, the air guitar thing, or just the sort of you're all in the bar together and listening to the same band, and everybody's just sort of dancing to the same rhythm. There's this ecstatic union that goes on there. You could explain this in terms of mirror neurons and things like that. Schopenhauer's taking it as evidence of a metaphysical reality, but like Marx just said, I think you could at least point to the physiological mechanisms that make this sympathy possible and enjoyable. It's the same, the compassion that we feel when we see somebody in pain or whatever sort of triggers in our brain this feeling that it's sort of happening to us too. And so music, why wouldn't music be able to operate in the same sort of way?
And like I pointed out in the episode, the fact that we as human beings have forebrains that are able to project into the future allows us to associate rhythmic events and project them to their logical outcomes. Like if you hear several beats in a rhythm, you sort of project automatically that some next beat is going to happen in a regular periodicity. It's not even just the mathematics of the interval relationships that Schopenhauer was diving back to Aristotle's Poetics, basing it on Pythagoras's number series for harmonic resonance, and saying, oh, you could say your neurons respond to these whole number ratios of resonant frequencies, which they do. If you hear 1-to-2 ratio or 2-to-3 ratio, you hear these things as being harmonically related, just because of their mathematical relationships. But beyond that, the rhythmic aspect of things, you have a forebrain that allows you to project into the future, and that's part of what is our humanity. The thing that separates us from most animals is the ability to project into the future.
But
yeah, Mark.
That also seems to suggest that it's the mathematics of listening to music that we enjoy so much, and to me that also relates again to the principle of sufficient ground and using science to recognize patterns in nature that we can then predict, which then again points back towards our will, that we're just predicting certain patterns in order that we can serve the will again. And there's even there's a part in section 36 that Schopenhauer says, in addition, the logical method of mathematics will be repugnant to the genius, since excluding real insight, it cannot give satisfaction, rather offering a mere concatenation of inferences in accordance with the principle of sufficient ground of cognition.
What is principle of sufficient ground? And just briefly, can you give me a definition?
It's Schopenhauer's substitution for the categories, so that Kant had. So it's the way in which we interpret / construct the world of experience. And so for Schopenhauer, it characterizes really the way the world of experience is given to us a priori. In other words, we don't even have to go out and check. So the fact that there is space, the fact that there is time, the fact that there is causality, that's really what it comes down to. He really thinks that even the concept, you don't even need the concepts of substance, say, as a separate thing, that it just, that comes with the concept of causality. It is derivable from that. So. Okay, that
makes sense.
So importantly, if you ask why is something the case, then the principle of sufficient ground or principle of sufficient reason is supposed to give you ways of interpreting that. You could be asking, just like Aristotle's different types of causes, you could be asking, what was the thing that immediately caused that? You could be asking for some material cause, just imposing this stuff from Aristotle. The one thing you can't ask, is something like, why does the universe exist? Something like that. Like the principle of sufficient reason that is in charge of our everyday experience and how we do science is not going to tell you why something exists at all. And so bringing in the will, which is not subject to the principle of sufficient reason, the principle of sufficient ground, there's no causality within it, there's no space within it, there's no time within it, there's no even you can't ask, is it a plurality or is it a unity? Like that category doesn't make sense to apply to something outside of experience. This is, of course, what's sort of contentious about Schopenhauer itself, that even if you agree that all these things apply to experience, you have to then say, well, something that's outside of any possible experience couldn't have any of those things. But he's sort of following folks like Berkeley that think like that sort of the unthought thought is a contradiction in terms. So you can't have an object that is disconnected from any possible thinker about that object. And so the principle of sufficient ground, again, sort of describes all the ways in which we concretely think objects. And even if you buy that, there's still the question of, well, then how could you talk about will at all? How could you do metaphysics? How could you do anything that's outside of the sphere of experience? But Schopenhauer seems to think that things like artistic experience, that is sort of a semi-mystical thing, give us legitimate reasons for that. And another reason is brought up in episode 114, is the why question when it comes to science. And you're not just talking why did one thing cause another thing, but why do the laws of nature exist at all? Why so we can the role of science is exhausted when we're talking about gravity just by giving the formula and saying this allows us to predict when something will fall, when one body will be attracted to another body, but it doesn't really tell us why our body's attracted at all. So that's why one of the reasons Schopenhauer thinks that he's justified in bringing in will into something outside of possible experience into it.
But he's way anticipating the anthropic principle in a way.
Say more about that.
The anthropic principle says that the reason that things are, the physical laws are the way that they are is because that's the only way that we could possibly understand them to be. Like the only universe that we could have come into existence in is one that allowed us to exist, essentially. It's hard to sum up in a couple of sentences, but it has to do with the idea of physics and how the physical laws, the nature of the physical universe is such that it is the only way that it could be to allow us to exist, and therefore the way that we see it and the way that we describe it is the only way that we can understand it to be.
And with this point of view too, it seems to also be saying that the more laws of science that we uncover, and the more things that we think we're learning about the natural world, those laws and those discoveries are actually pointing more towards human existence than they are towards like the outside world and how things should be objectively.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, Schopenhauer. To go back to Schopenhauer, Schopenhauer's understanding of objectivity is the will, really, because everything else is a subject. Everything else is a subjective understanding of the universe, and the only way that you could actually have any sort of objective reality would be to be the will, as I understand it, as I understand his writing of it. And therefore, all of the arts and all of the the way that he describes the aesthetic experience is to somehow allow the subject to potentially gain that objective viewpoint, which is why he loves music so much, because it can't be a literal communication. It's always a subjectively understood communication.
There were some sections when I was looking into Schopenhauer through Campbell. There were some sections where he's quoting Schopenhauer saying that with the will, the subject and object are not different from each other. The knower and the known become the same thing. And Campbell was connecting that with all the mystic traditions that, say basically, thou art that. The Brahman and the Atman are the same thing. The Father and the Son. I'm one with the Father. That's in Christianity and Buddhism. All these various mythological religious systems have this idea where the distinction between subject and object is dissolved in this experience of union.
Could I read a quote?
Sure.
So Schopenhauer says in section 38, talking about the sublime, that this state, however, is just what I described above, as required for the cognizance of ideas, as pure contemplation, absorption in perception, losing oneself in the object, forgetting all individuality, nullification of that manner of cognizance which follows the principle of sufficient ground, comprehends only relations. Then he says, the individual thing perceived rises to the idea of its species. The individual who is cognizant of it rises to the pure subject of will-less cognition, and the two as such now stand no longer within the stream of time and all other relations. It is then all the same whether one sees the sun setting from the prison or from the palace.
Hey, let me just interrupt for 1 second. So apparently Danny dropped off, had some technical problem. He's trying to reconnect, but we've maxed out the number of slots. So I just want to I'm posting the YouTube link to just watch this, and for the couple of people who like don't have an actual mic or aren't going to participate, I will ask you to just open up the YouTube link. If you see in the chat window right now, in a separate window, you can watch along. You can even catch up to this very minute, but then drop out of the conversation so that there's a slot left for Danny to join. Okay?
Man overboard.
All right. So we were one. So all right. I see one person dropped out. So maybe Danny will join. Go ahead. I'm sorry for interrupting.
I just really like that quote and how he ends it, that it's all the same whether we see the sun setting from the prison or from the palace. That beauty can be perceived regardless of one's context or whether you're rich or poor. If you can just rise above your own individuality, then everything is just aesthetically beautiful.
It's good to be back. I got bumped out there for a while. I was locked out of the gates of the Hangout.
Yay, Danny!
Pounding on the Hangout gates. I don't know where we're at, but I'm. Does someone want to fill me in on what we're talking about now?
We just had a beautiful quote about the dissolution of the subject and object in the will, and do you want to read that last bit again? That was the really good part, I think.
Yeah, sure. The individual thing perceived rises to the idea of its species. The individual who is cognizant of it rises to the pure subject, will-less cognition. The two, as such, now stand no longer within the stream of time and all other relations. It is then all the same whether one sees the sun setting from the prison or from the palace.
Yeah, it is a beautiful quote. It sort of strips everything away and sort of takes us all down to the basic egoless, classless, existence.
I was wondering about this whole egolessness, because people talk about this, even like improvisational musicians, that I lose myself and I become my instrument, I play through it, whereas that might be how it feels to you, but as somebody watching, as somebody listening, as somebody who's paying attention to you as an artist, I would say that's when you're exerting your ego, yourself, most blatantly, most.
That was the argument, Mark, that Michael Richards made when he screamed out all the racist stuff at the Laugh Factory.
That he was expressing his most honest self in.
Well, no, he said that he was once he gets lost in the comedy, he's not even talking anymore. He's just he's not thinking about what he's saying. It's unfiltered and complete, whatever.
It was the will that was saying those things. Yeah.
Right. So, I don't think there was ever a philosophical conversation on any of the newscasts that followed discussing it, but I think it's interesting because he was trying to take no responsibility for these things, saying these are not structured thoughts. I was just, again, improvising with my instrument being, a microphone, I guess, or just the himself being the instrument, maybe, but perhaps that's even more honest than what you would get if otherwise.
I think that in the West we could probably, this is just me, surmising here, but that the ego could be more identified with the discursive or rational self, whereas a non-ego would be more, intuitive self. And maybe that's what musicians or artists are talking about, that they don't have to rely on thinking about chord changes or anything like that, or where they're going. It's just their intuitive being is playing out in those moments.
But Mark, I think that point is a good one. That in order for the audience to even appreciate that music, there has to be some kind of ego, some individual there to make the music happen at all in order for it to be appreciated. And I feel like Schopenhauer, there's two types of truths. There's the conventional relative truth, and then there's ultimate truth. And I feel like Schopenhauer really leans much too heavily on just focusing on ultimate truth of things, and completely disregarding and being removed from any kind of conventional truth.
Well, it sounds like you're giving the distinction in Schopenhauerian terms between the world of experience, the conventional truth, so there is an empirical ego, and this world of the thing in itself, which is the ultimate truth. I don't think he ignores the former. In fact, all of Book One, all of his philosophy of science is all about that, and including based on the principle of sufficient ground. But you're right, in his analysis of art and music, it seems like it's a little more complicated than he's setting out, especially music, that talking about that as if you're mainlining the will. I mean, maybe if you were to give, even in Schopenhauerian terms, a more comprehensive account of the psychology of music, you would be referring more to the stuff. Of course, I'm actually hearing sounds in the world. It's not the will somehow piping through my dreams or something. I'm using my sense organs. I'm sensing, we're interacting as people, but you're right. And I think something I alluded to also that I wanted to bring up with Jonathan or anybody else that's played in a group before is, how does this notion of being egoless square with having to deal with other people? I mean, are you really entering like a spiritual orgy where you're all in the musical group playing together, being similarly egoless? It doesn't seem like that. That doesn't reflect my experience.
I think that Schopenhauerian terms of art, he does really like. I think it was Anthony who's now got his kindling and has a fire, was saying about how Schopenhauer reflected how style was important to expression, and I believe that he talked a lot about that in terms of art, and he talked a lot about how, for instance, you have poetry and history. And like you were talking about the universal truth versus the individual truth, the historian gives you the individual truth, but the poet gives you a better truth by, in a poetic way, describing the things that happened historically. He talks about how he really appreciates the poetry in that way because of the way that it's less formally devised, I think, than the historians' take on the actual events that happened. It doesn't. The historians recount of things. It is just event by event, whereas the poet's account of things is more the truth of the events that happens, and so more of the universality of the sort of things. Anyway, to go on about ego versus egolessness, I don't think that there are very many people that can actually play egolessly. They can play music egolessly, even if they are channeling the pure will.
And I kind of hope that singers are not doing that, because I don't know what would come out of their mouth. I mean, I guess it could be, you could have a Michael Richards like rant while you're singing. And
exactly.
Right.
But it's again, when you talk about Schopenhauer writing this in 1818, describing music as being the direct copy of the will, his experience of music was so specific was such a specific struggle of that motion towards the tonic goal, that motion towards the the tonality, and return to the root. I actually have a funny story to tell.
Okay, go ahead.
The day after we recorded this whole episode on aesthetics and Schopenhauer, I went to go see a concert down at the Conserthuset here in Stockholm because a friend of mine was singing in a Nielsen symphony. But the opening band, essentially, which was the same symphony orchestra, of course, but their opening piece, the first hour of this concert, was a Beethoven symphony from 1808, which would be the Eroica. And I hated it. I couldn't stand I mean, I'm so familiar with this piece. I'm so familiar with Beethoven. I've played in orchestras in college that played Beethoven. And during this entire piece, I kept thinking, okay, this is Schopenhauer's will. This is what he was thinking of while he was talking about this music was the direct copy of the will. So anytime I got lost in thinking, God, how trite this music sounds today, I kept moving back to thinking, okay, this is Schopenhauer's, this is the will. I'm hearing the direct copy of the expression of the will. And it struggled a lot. It was a lot of diminished chords, a lot of dominance, like it kept getting as dissonant as it could possibly get while still being tonal, to try to get back with repetitive motion, to try to get back to that tonal root over and over again. And I thought, well, Schopenhauer's will was tumultuous, I think.
I have a question.
Is this David?
Yeah, this is David.
Hey, David.
How's it going? Does for anyone who cares to interpret Schopenhauer as is he creating a demarcation for? I mean, with his thoughts, can we make a list of music, pieces that are the will and those that aren't or are substandard?
See, as Jonathan was telling his story, I was wondering, I mean, can you really say what is the will? Like, I mean, it's so subjective. Still, right?
I know. Well, in the books, he does talk about different kinds of music being more or less representational or more or less accurate in terms of describing it. He says that music that is trying to be a literal description, like he talks about Haydn's seasons, trying to, as opposed to Vivaldi's The Seasons. But he talks about music like that being too specific in its attempt to interpret or represent something actual, whereas music that was pure music, he thought, was more representational of the will. And I just assumed that Beethoven, being of the time period, German, in the same the most popular music essentially of the time that he started writing Book 3 would be pretty much his idea of the tonal representation of the will.
I mean, it's all still speculative, though, right?
Yeah, of course it's speculative. I mean, he does give a lot of examples in his interpretations of aesthetics and his interpretations of art of what types of art are more likely to be representational of the will, or able to draw you into an aesthetic experience that allows you to experience the sublime or potentially experience the sublime. But his thoughts are that music, for instance, music with words, becomes too literal.
Well, it's just a foreign admixture. It's not even that the music is
exactly.
Just that it's your experience of it becomes impure because you're not focusing on just the music anymore.
Right.
And I think it was Dylan that said it had that great thought about how it is music. This idea of music is that it is a direct copy of the will as it happens in time, and you are both sort of experiencing it, trying to experience it objectively, while the closer you get to it, the further it it appears to be from you, because it can never be. You can never actually be that ideal, be that will.
Could I join in here for a second?
Yes, please.
So I think that the reason, I think you can analyze.
Is it breaking up for everybody?
Yeah, we're having some hangout delays for you,
Yeah.
Anthony. Sorry, just start the sentence over.
Apart from Schopenhauer, of what we're talking about, we don't need Schopenhauer for this, I think. I mean, I think it's clear that what gives music its force is the fact that it's abstract and non-representational. That's it.
Yeah. Well, I think it might have gotten lost in Jonathan, the way you were putting it. That I don't think we want to say exactly that the music is supposed to represent the will. It's supposed to embody the will. It's supposed to,
or be a direct copy of it, as he.
Right.
Yeah, I guess I don't understand. It seems like a lot of these words he has to be using metaphorically, because you can't have a copy. Yeah. It sounds like something that's in the world of representation. It's not. You can't have a copy of something in the will just by the nature of will. So he has to be. Yeah, it's something metaphor. It's something like a copy. It's something an embodiment, but we have to be. Any of the words we're going to use are going to be approximations.
I think further, I've been thinking about his use of his continued explication of the mathematics involved in music, and I think that one of the reasons why he continued to talk about tuning, temperament, the mathematical relationships of frequencies, and that sort of thing, is because to represent that it's always going to be an imperfect representation. Like music is always going to be an imperfect representation of the will, because we can't experience it with perfect ratios in terms of the harmonies, from the harmonic series, the way that Pythagoras thought of these things, and it will always be an imperfect representation or a copy or whatever.
Yeah.
Sort of going along with this, it might be kind of interesting is that what Schopenhauer was thinking about when he was writing this stuff. Wagner was reading Schopenhauer at the same time that he was falling in love, and he took from this message the idea, this Orpheus and Eurydice thing again. Wagner writes Tristan and Isolde, which is a version of the Orpheus and Eurydice myth. And in that story, there's sort of this love-death complex where the lovers sacrifice their lives in order to achieve union. And so in this myth, you get a picture, I think, of the will-less will, the egoless will. I'm not explaining it very well.
This is sort of, in a way, post facto, because Schopenhauer initially wrote this about 40 years before Wagner wrote that, wrote these pieces, but then he revised it late in his life. So there are additions to this book on aesthetics that happened during Wagner's early compositional career. So
do you mean that Schopenhauer was making revisions based on what Wagner had been doing?
I don't think it was based on what Wagner had been doing. I don't know, actually. But Schopenhauer initially wrote this in 1815 or 1818, I can't remember, and then revised it in the 1840s when Wagner was just starting to write and become a celebrity composer. Tristan and Isolde wasn't until 1863, I think.
Sounds about right.
And I think that was about when Schopenhauer died, actually. But Schopenhauer was continuously adding and revising his takes on aesthetics and bitching about, poor poetry and poor musicians, that sort of stuff.
It does seem like he became a little more of a cult, like a little more famous, even though he's constantly bitching about not being famous enough and all the Hegelians being lauded instead of him. But that in the early 40s, late 30s, whatever, is when Schopenhauer sort of became more of a thing, and so maybe that's why he chose. I'm just speculating to release that giant thing of aesthetics essays that we talked about last year, as well as the third edition, I guess it was, of this World as Will.
But that is exactly where Wagner picked up on this stuff, and then Nietzsche really was contemporary, and then the ball rolls.
Yeah, wasn't Nietzsche a huge fan of both Wagner and Schopenhauer? And when he was young, in his early part of his career, he was condemning Socrates and Plato for dissing all the musicians, and instead insisting that this Dionysian ecstasy is a real thing that is worthy of being experienced. Rather, he's sort of pushing back against the excessive rationalism in favor of this more directly emotional experience of music.
And I'm happy to announce that we're going to be doing Birth of Tragedy as like one of the next couple episodes.
That's the piece I was thinking of.
Yep.
Exactly. Birth of Tragedy is where he gets into this defense of Dionysian ecstasy.
Yeah, and at that point he wasn't so pissed off at Schopenhauer and Wagner himself for their ascetic tendencies. That ultimately the ethical point of Schopenhauer is not embrace the Dionysian. It is chill out and enter this will-less state of contemplation, which is not the same as rock out, as the Dionysian musical.
I think that Nietzsche's will to power is accessing the will through that. And we're getting way off topic here, but yes.
Well, I don't think it's off topic, because that was the entire problem that I was having earlier with this is if you become will-less, well, you become really peaceful, but you're getting in touch with the will itself, so why would that be peaceful? So it seems like...
Because the will is turbulent and struggling.
Okay. I know there are a few actual Schopenhauer advocates on here. Does somebody want to respond to my discomfort with that ultimate picture of the will and how it relates to aesthetics, or am I being too vague?
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, go ahead.
Please.
Yeah, why the Birth of Tragedy?
Why are we covering that, or what?
Yeah. Of all of Nietzsche's works, why that?
Oh, just because this will be our fourth Nietzsche work, and we haven't covered that area yet. It wasn't the top of the list, but it displays an interesting aspect of him. Certainly this Apollonian Dionysian thing that is important for his later thought, but is just a kind of a cool essay in itself. I don't know.
Well,
Which were the other three?
Gay Science, On Truth and Lie, which is actually another really early one, and then the first one we did was Genealogy of Morals.
And how about Beyond Good and Evil?
Well, Beyond Good and Evil and Genealogy of Morals kind of, that's right. That's right between Gay Science and Genealogy of Morals, I think, or it's right next to Gay Science anyway. It seems like it has a lot of the same stuff that those two things. So maybe we'll get to that eventually, but I think it would be more likely that we do a super late one like Twilight of the Idols if we do another one after this, which we will. We love. We'll eventually do as much as we can stomach, just like Plato.
Are there specific things that people would like to hear on the show? Any suggestions? I don't know, Mark. I'm just throwing it out there.
Well, we have heaps and heaps of suggestions, but I'm always happy to hear more. Yeah, if people want to take the opportunity.
Beyond Good and Evil was
Will you ever cover book 4 of World as Will?
Good question. I think you should propose a not school group to do that, and I would even participate in that as long as I didn't have to sort of be the lead on that, because I freaking listened to the whole thing. I don't know that we'd have I'd like to do pessimism as far as Schopenhauer is concerned. So I don't know if reading parts of book 4 or whether just some of his later episodes. I think that would be the next Schopenhauer we would do. But it's not going to be, it'll be another year or so, I'm sure, at least. So do it sooner with a group.
Can I open up to any general questions to people? I want to make sure everybody's getting heard from. And is there anyone who's holding on to a thought or a question that they've been dying to ask and haven't been able to get in there and ask it?
But before we get too far away from this discussion, I would just say I'd like to see Jonathan back for the episode where you do Birth of Tragedy.
I would like that. I haven't read it for 35 years or something like that, but that was like probably the pivotal point where I moved from being a philosophy major to a classics major, actually.
Nice. And I know this is going to sound like a fanboy thing, but I think I experienced a little bit of that ecstatic Dionysian spirit when I saw Camper Van Beethoven in the late 80s in Denver.
Ah, well, yes, I'm trying to, channel the will, The Nietzsche will.
I think
Channel
it
the
comes
will,
right through
Jonathan.
the violin.
Channel the will.
There's something about the cello and the violin that's the most divine instrument.
Yeah.
I gotta say, just related to that, so I was a fan of theirs in college and in the 90s and late 80s, and kind of interpreted it. I think I was a little bit anti like straight up rock. Like I wasn't a Zeppelin fan. I liked the Who, but I always liked things in sort of at the volume that I would listen to it at, sort of in my own sort of cerebral way. And so then actually seeing Camper Van live the first time in 2001, I believe, and just hearing how reliant it was on just straight up, simple bass lines and heavy drums, and just really how, part of it's just the sound in any live environment, but just how actually rock and roll it was, sort of surprised me that this was not some little, geeky cerebral thing. It could be,
that was also doing a rock show, so it's different. I mean, for instance, when we played incidental music at the TED Talks in Chicago, we didn't do a rock show. That was a little different.
Gotcha. But was it even in the old, like when you're doing border ska and stuff, did you still have the rhythm section being as prominent? It's not on the recording so much.
No, I think that's a club thing. It's really dependent upon clubs.
Anyway, it's always a fun mix of almost a punk band. You guys were playing shows with punk bands, right?
Yes, a lot of times we were.
And did you get dissed for like not being hard enough by their fans?
Absolutely. I got a lot of crap for playing violin.
Little Farfisa parts.
Yeah, or those little. Well, but Elvis Costello's what was his name? Steve Neve playing those little Farfisa. That was my inspiration for those things. But as far as the violin, you were saying. David was saying that it was a potential divine instrument, or one of those instruments that's able to channel something. And the cello, I totally agree. The cello is like the size of the body, and so it sings in a way that sings music without lyrics that I think Schopenhauer would approve of course, as far as being able to channel something that is specifically purely musical and doesn't have that any sort of literal representation. Schopenhauer in this, I keep trying to bring it back to the conversation, but Schopenhauer, does actually say something which I was totally shocked by in this book 3 of how there was no specific signified in the signifier that is music, that I thought was brilliant precursors to semiotics, and how he's trying to say that the language that's being represented when music is happening, the language that it's speaking, is not something that you have a literal interpretation of or literal understanding of. It's something that that communicates something to him. It's the will, that makes us think or feel or experience something where we can't actually have a literal way of describing it or saying what it is.
Do you think it has to do with the string instruments, by the way?
One thing, I just read this quote or this piece on B.B. King after he died, saying that the reason that B.B. King was so good was because he played out of tune. And their point was, everything that he played was he was pushing the notes or trilling the notes or moving them or bending them so that he was not in tune. His thirds were stretching or coming down, so it was like it was more expressive in that way. Everything that he played in his guitar solos was not in tune as far as being in tune with the rest of the band, and that's why he was so great. A violin, of course, has no frets. David Lowery famously says that the violin, because it has no frets, is one of the 3 scariest instruments in the world. The violin, the pedal steel, and the bagpipe.
The bagpipe is scary for other reasons.
Yeah,
Don't forget the theremin. Come on.
Yeah, I know.
Hey, look, I'm half Scottish. I can make these jokes. All right, tip your waitresses, folks.
I have a.
I was gonna say, Sidney Bechet. They said similar things about with his clarinet playing. What made him so great was basically that he wasn't keeping the rules. It seems to be specifically, what you're saying about B.B. King was this quote out of tune. It's out of tune with the rules as far as I see it, right?
So my out-of-tune singing is brilliant because it's...
If you think of the violin as sort of imitating the human voice, but there's no consonants in there, there's no words, there's no syllables. Instead, it's just this sort of pure emotional expression of language without any definitions, you know.
Well, I think that's exactly what Schopenhauer was saying when he was saying that there was no signified to the signifier that was the sound that you were listening to.
By the way, sorry. Go on, John. I didn't mean to interrupt. Go on. Sorry.
It's a language without a specific semiotics, and the only thing that it's really representing is, in a good musical performance, is the will itself, of course, as opposed to trying to represent something. But then, in the episode of the Partially Examined Life, we ended up talking about film music and how film music was trying to be representational and trying to manipulate the listener by leading them with these sound ideas.
Right. Yeah.
Here's a little story for you, by the way. I took violin as a kid. I grew up in Flushing, Queens, and anyone who knows about Flushing, Queens knows that it was taken over by Korea in the late 80s. And so I had a Korean violin teacher named Mr. Moon, and I thought I was going to be a great violinist. I was very excited about it. And when my family moved to Long Beach, Long Island, I stopped taking lessons, and I thought they pulled me away from being a genius musician. It wasn't until this year that I found out the truth is that Mr. Moon dumped me because he said that I could never be a great violinist because I'm too stubborn in my ways.
Oh, terrible.
He told my parents that they gave me too much love for me to ever be a great musician.
So I have a question if we're still doing Schopenhauer. Mark, you said in the podcast, I think it was you said that that you have to buy into Schopenhauer's metaphysic to carry on with his thoughts on music. Does anyone else disagree with that, or I mean, as one who definitely doesn't buy that particular metaphysic, is there something for us to learn from Schopenhauer's analysis of music without buying the metaphysic?
Of course, there must be.
What? Is there anything else that we can learn from Schopenhauer's? Can you say it again, David?
Just without concerning ourselves with the will, or what is it true? Does anyone want to defend the position that it is not true that we have to buy into Schopenhauer's metaphysic in order to carry on with his analysis of music?
I think Wes thought that was the case. But go ahead, Anthony, if you have something positive, because I don't really have.
You wouldn't need to have to buy into it. Not like I said earlier, the analysis will hold true regardless of the more. I mean, I'm going to take metaphysic to mean the more abstract part of Schopenhauer's worldview. So, I mean, the analysis of music as whoever was just previously saying there, that it doesn't have any signified, that it's all kind of signifiers, I think they said. Like that semiotic, that semiotic analysis is another way of saying that it does not represent things. So in the Peircean system, it would mean that music is all sign and no object, and in the Saussurean system, it would mean it's all signifier and no signified. And I think that's interesting in that it forces us to, or allows us to imagine semiotic systems where you can have where the two parts of the sign aren't present, because generally they're present. You know, you also have the label and the description of the thing. So it's interesting to imagine what it would be to have a thing without a label, or a label without a thing. And I think what Schopenhauer is saying is that music is that which only has form. It's all form and no representation. So, and I don't think you would need to. I don't think his metaphysics, or the world as will. I don't think whatever about where the music comes from, or if you're destroying your ego as you create, or if you're expressing your ego or whatever. I think that's incidental to the analysis of how music works as an art form or artwork.
Just seems there are plenty of other non-representational arts, even just visual art. That's more to do with color.
Only recently, though. I mean, not in Schopenhauer's time. So, and only after the birth of the camera.
So, for instance, architecture. We would normally consider architecture, unless you have an S-shaped building or something, is an art, but is non-representational. It's about form. Schopenhauer explicitly thinks that it is representing, in the way that the force of gravity. That it's actually sort of what makes an architectural work cool is that it kind of defies gravity in an interesting way.
Oh, that's nice.
So I think if you could, that's an interesting observation, and that could go with the observation that you just brought up about music. But if you get rid of the will stuff, then sort of the hard and fast division between music and the other arts, I think, disappears. So you end up just having a conversation about, is it representational, and if it's not, what is it? And that's an interesting conversation, but it just doesn't seem like you need Schopenhauer to have that conversation, or that he has anything particularly unique or awesome to say about that.
Well, you could translate almost everything he says about will into more naturalistic terms. Because he's looking at phenomenal reality and making inferences what must lie behind to make these phenomenal realities what they are. But we can just look at the phenomenal realities and still say it's most of the same things about music, I think. Or just treat it as, like I've been wanting to, as a inheritance of world mythology and stuff. It's sort of embedded in the language and the culture. And I sort of lost my track of thought.
No, well, I think. Go ahead.
I think you can take his points without buying into the will, without buying into his metaphysics of the one being this particular type of thing. I mean, all the various mystics are going to characterize the one in different ways. It's a totality, it's a unity, it's power, it's will, it's quality per se. Right. The Tao. It's there's different flavors of Emerson had a different one too, and you can start to make finer distinctions about how they're trying to characterize this thing that isn't supposed to be defined anyway. But they're really just talking about the patterns that we see in our phenomenal experience, and in this case, I think especially the affective domain. How these things make us feel, the sympathy, the compassion, all that stuff.
To sum up what David's saying, I think it's all about how it hits you, man. It's it's pretty much the gist of it, right?
Yeah, it does.
Temperament has a lot to do with it. I'm sorry, Mark. Go ahead. I've been talking too much.
Pirsig and probably there are other modern figures that, maybe Heidegger falls into this category, but like you're saying, is this perennial philosophy of thinking that there's a union at the bottom of everything or something. But I think it's only been recently, only with the coming of phenomenology, that you have people saying we could buy all that as experiential without drawing metaphysical conclusions from it at all, right? Husserl's big deal was that we don't even have to decide whether physical objects actually exist out there or not. We can bracket that, and we can just talk about the patterns of our experience. So, he was really just making explicit something that was in Kant about, that we got the phenomenal world, but, what's ultimately back there, who knows? So folks like, I think this even goes to the religious folks like Jaspers and Ricoeur, I think see the religious aspect as sort of an essential part of the pattern of our lives, of our experience, but don't think that then you have to actually embrace a religion in its metaphysical claims beyond that. So, you could do a version of Schopenhauer in the same way and say, yeah, actually the experience of music is like losing myself and entering this peace and this will-less. You could buy almost everything that Schopenhauer has to say, but just say there's no metaphysical implications whatsoever. And maybe that would adjust. Yeah, maybe that would adjust ultimately how you should act based on that. That if you think that the best thing I can do is to shed all. We're reading Augustine for a future episode right now. The best I can do is shed all the worldly things, and because there's going to be heaven where everything's going to pay off. That there actually is a metaphysical element like heaven out there that's going to then really reorient the entire way we experience things. If you don't think that, I do think that there is an implication for. I'm not sure how this affects Schopenhauer, because Schopenhauer too isn't going to say there's a heaven. It isn't going to say I think that when you die, there's any sort of experience of now you're one with the will. Like I don't hear anything of that out of him. It's just more that it really would be better. This is in his pessimism, or which if anybody watched True Detective, I just saw that that there's a character that spouts Schopenhauerianism, like that our creation as individual beings with this kind of human nature was a mistake. Like it really would be better. It would be more harmonious with the world if we just you take that kind of pessimistic attitude. Yes. Chill out from your individual desires, from really what human nature is pushing you toward, and the best that we could do is artistic experience and philosophical wisdom in terms of sitting back and attaining a point of stillness or something.
Yeah.
Jonathan, we can't hear you. You seem to be muted.
Sorry, I thought I muted and I unmuted, and vice versa. I don't think that he was necessarily saying that it was that stillness was, like, for instance, when he was talking about the sublime, like the easiest ways to experience the sublime in aesthetics were things that were potentially dangerous.
And that it took a conscious effort to overcome the aversion that you had to it. So yeah, it does seem hard to describe that experience as a stillness. I would still maintain that after you do that, that you are as
stillness.
Right. So everything is swirling around you. That's the sublime experience, is that you are at peace in the face of this crazy massive infinity and swirling.
And that the sublime experience in terms of music is not that you become enveloped in it or enveloped in the will, but that you are able to stand outside of it and watch it as a pure representation of the continuation of the will, and you are again supposedly at peace or in approaching some sort of objective viewpoint of listening to this music or listening to this or watching this or looking at this art, or seeing the ideals or the ideas, the Platonic ideas or Platonic forms within these things.
Can I read a Schopenhauer quote that relates to that?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, please.
He says at the end of section 35, whoever then, according to what has been said, has so far submerged and lost himself in the perception of nature, that he continues to exist only as purely cognizant subject, is just by that fact made immediately aware he is as such the condition, thus the bearer of all the world and all objective existence. For the latter is now displayed to him as dependent on his own existence. He thus draws nature into himself so that he continues to experience it only as an accident with respect to his essence. And then he quotes Byron, who says, "Are not the mountains, waves, and skies a part of me and my soul as I of them?"
He's a transcendentalist, isn't he?
He is a transcendentalist, yeah.
I think, this is one of the things that when they're talking about the dissolution of the ego, they don't mean like the destruction of the ego exactly, but you stop
Like
identifying
superposition.
with that as an individual, and instead you expand your identity. So, as Todd just said, quoted, you're identifying with all of nature, all living things, even the rocks and the trees, and that's a different sense of the self.
And then to answer, Mark, your question about whether or not being part of the will, you'd be in a peaceful state, Schopenhauer says right after that, who then, feeling this, could take himself to be, as opposed to imperishable nature, absolutely transitory? He will rather be seized by the consciousness that is pronounced in the Upanishads. All these creatures, together am I, and beyond me, no being exists. So you kind of gain, I guess, some peace of mind just by knowing that, you're a part of everything else, just as everything else is a part of you, and that's where subject and object get dissolved.
Yeah. So for me, the way I look at it is just a matter of which perspective you're holding on. And I don't the religious versus atheist difference, because Carl Sagan, for example, he famously said that we're all stardust. We come from the same stuff. We're the universe experiencing itself. So from that, even though it sounds like this Eastern philosophy stuff sounds religious, then if you look into biology, you can find that all living kind of come from the same starting point, right? And if you look into chemistry, they're the same material, different materials, and the same stuff.
Yeah, it's interesting how we can get at least three different philosophical foundations for a unity, and this is what I was having so much trouble with back in our Emerson episode, is that he wasn't really being clear which of these we're talking about. That you could take it up just like you just said, Sebastian. This naturalist, we all come from the same thing. You could point to Darwin, that we all evolved from the same thing and ultimately we are all stardust in that way. There's nothing you could still believe that. I think we made this point when Paul Provenza brought this up on the Jaspers episode, that you could believe that but still say, but now I'm the top of the food chain and screw all you animals, and there's nothing by us all having the same origin, right? That would be the genetic fallacy, to say that implies anything morally about what I have to do right now. In fact, even among human beings, I could say, well, okay, fine, we all have the same source, but that doesn't mean I'm not the boss, and there's a slave class that has to be, it's compatible with a lot of different ethical systems. But so you got the origin one, you've got the mystical, literally, we are all one thing, and it's just an illusion that I have any individuality at all. I think that's what I get out of the Vedas and what I get out of Schopenhauer. But Schopenhauer adds the Kantian point that the reason I can say that I am all one with all the stuff that I see around me is because of the Kantian. I'm actually generating, through the principle of sufficient ground, this whole experiential world, and you and I are all doing that together. So to me, those are really quite three very different claims with different ethical implications, but they sort of all get mashed together into one thing when you're thinking about these I am the universe.
Could you rephrase I think it was the third one, the Schopenhauer's approach.
Well, this is what I got out of the quote that Todd just read. Why is all one? Well, because everything that I perceive, so this would not include the will that's outside of that, unless you say that everything I perceive is underlyingly equivalent to the will. So maybe even the will, even myself, are all one thing just because of the unity of apperception, I think is the way Kant puts it. That is, that the experiential world, like the Matrix, is only created by subjects sort of interpreting things.
Mm.
Yeah, there's this idea, I don't know if Schopenhauer actually encountered it, but in the East there's this idea that reality is this net of jewels or net of gems, and they're connected sort of in rows and up and down and back and forth, and each gem is faceted so that it reflects all the other gems. And this is supposed to be a picture of how everything arises mutually together, that everything exists in relation to everything else, and everything conditions everything else. So it's like this, like the will is the great God that's dreaming the world, and we're all figures in the dream of the will. And so in that sense, the individuality is not a negation of the unity, but sort of how it operates. It's paradoxical, you know, as an analytic philosopher would like throw his head back and laugh and get to work about how this doesn't work logically and stuff like that. That's, you know, and if I look at it like that, the whole thing is nonsense. When I turn to the mythology and the religion, it's poetry, it's beautiful, and I know what they're talking about. They're describing what life is like for us, you know.
And Schopenhauer has a way to put that distinction, that if you're applying, so logic itself is part of the principle of sufficient reason. It's one of the four, in the fourfold root, I think, is, you know, the logic that Aristotle worked out. So if you want to say, you know, so I raised to somebody that was defending Schopenhauer on the blog in the comment section, how can you say that, you know, I am equivalent to that I and this glass are the same thing? Because clearly we want to say, for lots of purposes, I am not the glass. If I'm supposed to show up for work on Monday and I send the glass instead, I shouldn't expect to get paid. So obviously there's a sense in which I am not these things. The Buddhist has a ready way of saying that, okay, well, there's conventional reality, me and the glass are different, and then there's ultimate reality, me and the glass are the same. So for Schopenhauer, it's in the phenomenal world, I as a phenomenal being am distinguished from the glass, but in the noumenal world we are not. And that's just very hard to get a grip on. And I'm not satisfied that it's intelligible. That I can't make, you know, we spent all of episode 114 trying to make sense of this notion that all the individual things, I and the glass, are manifestations of a single underlying unity. And to me, the word manifestation there is almost meaningless. It is like, so you might as well just throw up your hands and say, like Augustine or somebody like that, there are some things that we don't understand. When we get to the world as is in itself, it is the divine, and just like we can't understand perfect unity and perfect goodness and all this stuff, because those are of the divine realm, you know, we can't even understand clearly the distinction between the phenomenal realm, the earthly realm, and the divine realm. Like, at least be honest, be an honest, you know, religious apologist, and make those kind of limits. Whereas Schopenhauer, no, I'm an atheist, I'm entirely secular, and yet I can still support this kind of crazy distinction between the unified one and the phenomenal many. That's the man in my rant. Anybody want to respond?
I think that yeah, I would like to say that whenever this line of reasoning comes up, and I've listened to a lot of your episodes, that I immediately think of any kind of constructivist epistemology. It seems to me it's hard to anything pre-cybernetics and pre-second order cybernetics have a good enough, reflexivity. I think that's why, like, I'd love if you guys did a more like a 20th century text that took in.
I think you're breaking up there.
Yeah, we're having enough Google Hangout issues. What kind of text? Can you just repeat
okay.
that?
Well, how much of that did you get?
Now you sound perfectly clear.
Yeah, take it again.
Great.
Pre-cybernetic, something. That's about all I got.
Well, yes. That's the thing. The whole. I think a lot of what cyberneticists try to do is to explain, that subject-object divide, to explain how, to explain subject-object as system and environment, and how the environment is reflected within the system. So anything that touches on second-order observation is going to answer, I think, this line of reasoning, and this line of reasoning comes up again and again and again, in older philosophies, but I don't think can ever be articulated as well as anything post the cybernetic revolution. It just can't really,
All right, so email me a list of readings for that. I will definitely consider.
It's true that theories of consciousness, once people started to talk about artificial intelligence, they came up with a lot of there were a lot of theories of consciousness, and the subject-object background really became the basis of these studies.
Yes.
The idea of what was Coates, I think, was the mathematician. I can't see the book from here on the shelf, but who based an entire theory of mathematics on the separation of things, like is not is the only symbol that is used. So it's like the idea of separating subject from object was able to be done by one symbol there, and the whole theories of consciousness said that the way that one distinguishes self-consciousness is by distinguishing an object against an objective background, something that is not subject, something that is not background, and something that must be an object, and that was the bases for establishing consciousness.
Did
that make sense at all?
What was it? The mathematician that you were referring to that made the leap to consciousness, or is it two different authors that you're talking about?
Two different authors, okay. But the mathematician was. This is all post World War II theory, but the mathematician was trying to simplify mathematics to be able to reflect how subject and object became subject and object as opposed.
Well, do you mean George Spencer Brown? Do you?
Yes, I mean George Spencer Brown. Yes,
say the name again.
Yeah, the laws of form. Yes. So that's he just said that you start off with formlessness and make a mark, and because he reduces all acts of perception to just making distinctions, and of course this is I think the step that is overlooked right at the very start by phenomenologists.
Yes. Yes, exactly. You're exactly.
You have to be able to distinguish. Yeah. Yeah.
Mm. Anyway, that sounds really interesting. I'll have to look up that author. George Spencer Brown, is that who you said?
Yes.
Oh, yeah. Cool.
The laws of form.
And that as a basis for starting a new theories of consciousness and new theories of self-consciousness, essentially post 1950s, really. Anyway, I'm off topic entirely here now. Sorry.
But yeah,
I'm still getting. It sounds like somebody has a party in another room or something.
I think it's Danny. Danny is broadcasting from a coffee shop.
Oh,
but there's nobody else here.
Oh.
And there's no music. So I don't know.
Well, I think we're entering the home stretch. Do folks want to sort of give closings or what? Say whatever you haven't got to say yet.
I had one question about Schopenhauer and being a transcendentalist, how he relates. This may be outside of the readings, but how he relates to Hegel. And it seems for all of his animosity that he has towards Hegel, there's quite a few areas that he seems to say a lot of similar things to Hegel. Like at the end of section 33, he says, cognizance remains, as a rule, always subject to the service of the will, having arisen indeed for the sake of this service, indeed having sprouted from the will. And there's also what Hegel says in the lectures on the philosophy of world history, that the universal premise of this investigation is that world history represents the idea of spirit as it displays itself in reality as a series of external forms. And it seems like Hegel and Schopenhauer are kind of trying to say similar things, but Hegel labels his system more theistic and Schopenhauer more atheistic. Does anybody have any thoughts on that?
I think we need to do another Hegel episode and get some more Hegel in front of us for me to feel comfortable responding to that again. My take has been that Hegel really doesn't make, I interpret him as a phenomenologist, that he really doesn't make large-scale metaphysical commitments. So even when he's talking about the spirit of a nation and the spirit of history, he's not literally talking about an underlying spirit or anything like Schopenhauer's will. In fact, the move from Kant to most of the post-Kantianisms, as I understand it, Hegel being really the primary representative of this, is just to deny that the thing in itself is even a coherent concept. To just say there's just the phenomenal world, and the phenomenal world is layered in a lot of ways that are interesting and available to analysis. And so one of the ways for Hegel that is pretty strange to us today, but is this talking about the spirit of a society and the spirit of world history, and that the directedness of history that he thinks comes out of that. And yes, there are some people who are Hegelian theologians who then really take him seriously as the humanity ultimately becoming conscious of itself at the end of world history, that's really what God is, and the whole this process of him working through us as we gain more self-consciousness and progress in this way, and societies collide with each other and ideas collide with each other and have a steady improvement, that whole thing is kind of the being of God slushing around in a Spinozan kind of manner. So you could take that view of God. I think that Hegel himself, just based on the way Kierkegaard slammed the Hegelians, it seems like Hegel himself might have interpreted himself much more conservatively and less strangely than that, but I've never read Hegel's Philosophy of Right or something, so I can't really even address exactly what the story is for him. I think there's a lot of just the fact that they're both post-Kantianisms and share a lot of the Kantian concerns make them much more similar than Schopenhauer admits, but I don't know. I'll take Schopenhauer at his word that he's in his Metaphysics of the Will. He's proposing something that is diametrically opposed to at least how Hegel was being taken by his contemporaries.
Well, I guess one difference is that Hegel thought history and consciousness moved along with subject and object, and then the bridging of those two gaps, thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. And Schopenhauer doesn't seem to think that history is as structured as Hegel does.
Doesn't Hegel sort of believe that the absolute that's, showing up in the phenomenal world, there's something behind it all that's completely rational? Isn't that, and that's going to mark the difference.
Well, again, I don't know if it's behind it all, but yeah, the structure of the interactions between these elements is supposed to be rational in a way that Schopenhauer explicitly denies.
Right. That does seem to be a marked difference.
So again, it's, the difference is how do you characterize the one? If that's what you can, if you can refer to Hegel's absolute as the one, a version of the one.
I'm not even sure of that, but yeah, we'll get back to that someday.
Yeah, I don't really know.
Can I ask a question? One more.
Yeah, Anthony.
Question. Yeah. So, I'd just be interested to hear what people think in terms of. I remember when you did Leibniz and his monadology, and how I think you could say that was like ontology, like to monads, and
yeah, Anthony, you're breaking up.
Schopenhauer doing the same thing with the will, or is he doing it? Okay, so what I'm trying to ask, characterize Schopenhauer as being ontologically monist in the same way, say that Leibniz would be at his monadology. That.
Well, is Leibniz actually ontologically monist? I know, because I thought he said there's a multiplicity of monads, right? That's so he's a pluralist. But I'm not. At this point I don't pretend to understand Leibniz. It's been so long since we read that. I need to get back to that as well.
Well, in that they both reduce to one thing. I get that Leibniz would say that there are a multiplicity of monads. It's not just one monad, but
it has that the thing Dave Buchanan mentioned about the jewels. Like that sounded like Leibniz to me, which every jewel reflects every other jewel. And Schopenhauer, you definitely see that too. Which I think is a constant in Eastern philosophy is not uncommon. That if you delve into the self, into your personal self far enough, then you get the universe. That's in the same way you're talking, that because we're all reflections of the will, then every little bit of the will is sort of understandable by every other bit. And this was especially weird and blatant in Schopenhauer when we were talking about in episode 114 about how he actually believed in synchronicity among. He didn't seem to think that you have to give a temporal sequence to account for, say, the development of adaptive characteristics by organisms, right? That Darwin wants to give you a scientifically explicable picture of the process by which an organism could become adapted to the environment. But Schopenhauer, because he thinks that ultimately the will is not temporal, it's not temporal. I'm trying to say that word right, Warren. I've pronounced that wrong forever. Temporal, then it's not temporal. I just learned. If you look it up, it's only temporal. It's the accents on the first. Anyway, somebody corrected me on the blog, and now completely derailed myself. But in any case, it's all supposed to, the universe is supposed to beam out of one thing.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think what I'm trying to say is I'm always very suspicious of any like hyper reductive ontology. I know that sounds ridiculously kind of I don't know. I don't kind of how would other people feel about that? But I think once you reduce everything to one kind of thing, it becomes just meaningless by definition. You may as well substitute in X for that.
Everything is love, man. It's all love.
So either atoms or canvas, then I think. So it's unedifying and it ceases to be able to explain anything, I think, phenomenally, if you know what I mean.
Jonathan, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I wanted to say yes, absolutely. I think that's the problem with like pushing everything off onto some some flowing unity that is happening outside of the phenomenological universe. To say that to understand it, or to like we were supposedly this conversation was about the aesthetics, but the aesthetics that he's talking about are trying to approach the sublime nature of being able to understand this oneness that is flowing on outside of us, that is everything that we embody. But if you can't, if you step away from the phenomenological aspects of everything that we experience, then you can't define it. You can't define the will. You can't define the one. You can't define the monad, whatever it is. And so we're stuck. We're basically stuck where we started from.
Yeah.
It becomes. I don't know. I mean, we're circling around something. We're always circling around something that we can't really understand.
Which is why, Mark, I was saying earlier, I always feel like Schopenhauer is dying to say God, but
he's dying to. He's going to extreme lengths not to talk about God.
Right.
Which maybe that's one of the differences between him and Hegel, is that it's not clear that Hegel is actually talking about anything recognizable as God, but yet he does throw that word around. Schopenhauer is saying something identifiably theist and won't.
Yeah. All right, guys. Any wrap-up thoughts? Are there any things that we didn't cover that we want to cover, Mark?
Thanks everybody for showing up. I know after last time and the cock-up that resulted in even though Seth was very entertaining and it was a good introduction to Danny, even though he had just had a car accident and was reeling from various maladies, and our one audience participant, Tara Lee was great. But still, I like to see a full house here, and so this makes me think that this is a sustainable thing. I was not so sure. This was going to be our last shot at doing this, and I think we've pushed it, so we'll have one for Freud, which is next.
Nice. Well, this was cool. It was great having like a big audience here, and I'm still finding my footing with it, but I think I hope I did a good job navigating between everybody, and a lot of great thoughts from you guys on the episode. Thanks, Mark. That's cool. I think, and thank you, Jonathan.
It's been really fun to be involved.
Cool. I hope you guys will all be back next time, and we can keep everybody else fine. It's crazy that they shut you out after a certain number.
Yeah, that's 12 maximum. So we got to. The host is not allowed to lose connection. I think that's. And actually, we're lucky because normally it would be Danny that started the call. But we came down to it and it wasn't working for his end, so I started the call. But I think if I dropped off, it would actually get all of you. It would knock all of you off. So had it worked and Danny started the call, the entire thing would have been destroyed.
Yeah, it all worked out.
I just want to say it's kind of a thrill and an honor to be talking to a bunch of smart guys. I'm kind of a fanboy of several of you people, and thank you for doing this.
I know, I like smart people.
Thank you, guys. I hope you all come back for Freud.
Yeah, thanks for having us in this conversation.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And any plugs, Mark?
Any plugs, Jonathan? Go buy his. Did you guys listen to the song of his at the end of the last episode? It's like a 10-minute epic. It's awesome. Yeah.
Wow, yeah, that song was really incredible, especially listening to it after the discussion of World and Will. Like, it was just, it really seemed to go part and parcel with what we were talking about.
Yeah,
that particular album has a lot of Play-Doh, I think, actually.
It's obvious from your musical skills that your parents gave you an adequate amount of not loving you.
Right, and, exactly. And that's what I'm trying to do with my daughter by putting her to bed while I'm trying to talk. I'm trying to talk here. It's good.
To be a great musician.
I'll be buying some records from Jonathan.
All right, thanks to everybody.
Bye, you guys.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Thank you.